Shout. Hands up! Both hands, mother... On the ground now. I don't need you talking. On the ground. Don't sweat me. What the
County 911 location of emergency. Help! I can't. One more time. We're on Flat Bottom Road. What's your name? Okay. I got him kind of. What's your name? Can you hear me?
"911 gets a call, and there's a voice on the phone saying, help, it's garbled, they're trying to figure out exactly what's going on.
I have an officer there, but you have to go to the door. Can you hear me?
Uniform patrol deputies get there, they're trying to make contact. It's late, it's dark, they can't hear anything. They do a safety sweep of the house to try to locate if there's been a crime.
You could see blood all over the ground and a trail of blood that led up to the front of the house. I approached the house and could see bloody handprints down the wall, all over the threshold of the door. Opening the door, there was just a large pool of blood. You could tell that someone had been laying on the ground in that blood. We located a female on her bed, covered in blood, and she had a gunshot wound to her face.
They begin life-saving measures with her. When somebody's shot in the face, it's really time-sensitive to get them medical attention. Her potential for survival, we were not very confident. We didn't know if she was going to make it through the night or if she was going to be in a coma. We had no idea.
I loved my sister. People thought we were twins, 13 months apart. We just had fun together. We'd go into the woods next to Mom's house where we lived and grew up, build teepees and little houses out into the woods. Very, very simple life. People remember her kindness. She loved everyone. She would help everyone. She would give you the shirt off of her back. She was truly a one of a kind.
You have one shot at a crime scene to do it right. You're looking for everything. Everything that you look at is potential clue, is potential evidence. When we went into Angela's house, the house was in disarray. We weren't sure what we had yet. But anytime that someone receives a gunshot wound to the head and there's nobody on scene, you have to look at a potential suicide attempt.
Inside the house, there was a small chair to the side, and immediately you could see the shininess of a cartridge casing. You could see a gunshot that went through the window directly behind the chair.
The projectiles were there, but there was no weapons found on the property. We weren't sure still exactly what had happened. The only person that can tell us is the victim.
When I arrived at the hospital, it was very important for me to try to communicate with Angie. I could look at her and see that there was an injury to her nose, and it caused a significant hole in her face going into her nasal cavity. The extent of her brain damage was unknown. The extent of any lasting injuries wasn't known, but she could respond to some very basic commands. We saw her moving her hand, so we decided we were going to try to communicate with writing. Angie, can you hear me? You able to write down? Did you do this to yourself? Who had the gun? Okay, this is very important. What is his name? Sue knew him? Okay.
Is this the guy that worked for you out at Mom's house?
In talking with Angie, she identified Sue as the person who would know the man that shot her. I learned that Sue was an acquaintance of Angie and had gotten her in contact with a male that had come and done some work at her house. She was able to identify him as David Wolgemuth.
Once we were able to confirm that she was stating that a subject did this to her was the first time that we were 100% confident that we were in a manhunt now, and the clock was ticking.
David worked 2 days in a row doing minor things around the house, and Angela was not impressed. So the third day that he arrived, Angela actually fired him. There's a motive right there.
Basically, once we were able to identify David Wolgemuth, we run everything. His criminal history was pretty vast. The most telling thing for us was he had recently spent more than a year in jail on a essentially cruelty to an animals charge where he had tortured and burned a cat to death. During the course of that, he burnt down his family's home in Ackworth. So we know at that point we want to talk to him.
We gathered up detectives to go track him down. Finally, they stopped at a Burger King. He was standing right outside one of the entrances. As soon as we were able to confirm that it was him, we took him into custody. He was definitely not happy that we had caught up with him.
When somebody's in custody, you want to talk to them. First, we have to decide on the interview room. Everything in a serious criminal interrogation is contrived. From the layout to how long they're going to sit by themselves. I wanted him to be able to have a safety blanket because if he says lawyer, we're done. That's it. So we decided to leave the table in the middle of the room. And we were gonna sit very traditionally on one side and he was gonna sit on the other.
Okay. Just for everybody's safety, I'm gonna check you one more time before we take the handcuffs off of you, okay?
All right, David. My name's Lieutenant Clark with the Sheriff's Office. I'm gonna go ahead and record this that way and get take a whole bunch of notes or anything, okay? So, this is Sergeant Hands.
How are you, sir?
We want to be able to talk to you about an incident that happened here recently. All right.
When somebody's in custody, you're on a clock. Now the game begins.
This is a formality for us, and I want to know what your side of the story is and why things have happened the way they did. I would love to hear what you've got to say.
We need to get him talking because we don't have anything. If he says lawyer, we're done. That's it. And a woman's life is at stake in addition to any justice that she's going to get.
Angie's personality was, she's the funny one. She was the one that, you know, just wanted people to laugh and people to have fun, things like that.
My sister had the nickname Catfish because she very seldom showed her teeth. When she smiled, she always had just a little long smile across her face. Angie was just a precious sister.
Now, tell me something, David. And my captain, you rode back here in the car with him. You said you were working, the last odd job that you had was up at, you said Angie's house in Ball Ground. When was the last time that you worked up there?
Probably something like that. Probably something like a week ago, I don't know.
About a week ago, so.
Probably more than that.
And so that's the last job that you had. What have you done in that past week?
Just different stuff to get money.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure. Yeah.
How did y'all find me? Y'all are a lot quicker than I thought.
What do you mean we're a lot quicker than?
Y'all are a lot quicker than I thought.
He's not even asked us really why he was there or what was going on. You know, it was, hey, how'd you catch me so quick? That was a big red flag.
We all understood why we're in the same room. It was just unacknowledged.
You know, dude, we have all kinds of ways of finding people around. The fact that we're sitting here talking is what's relevant right now, right? So, you know why we're here.
Tell us how we got there.
How we got where?
Where we are now.
What are you talking about?
Tell me what happened last night.
We started realizing the magnitude of what was happening to him. So now was the time to back down. I want him to not look at us as adversaries. I want to be his friend. And that's just rapport building 101.
Here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand what all happened.
I don't really know where to start. I just couldn't.
Hey, David, look, why don't you start where you want to with it and just tell us the whole thing?
What led you in the past day to us talking to you today? If I could ask you.
I'm gonna put it in general terms and kind of put it from my point of view. My fiance needed money. She's very clingy. She didn't want me to be gone all the time, but she wanted money at the same time, so I made her happy. to the best of my ability.
Okay.
How much money would you say?
It's gotta be like something like 7,000 now.
You see, you're supporting a big chunk of her living expenses.
Yeah.
Kid, that's a huge responsibility.
Lay it out so that
Charmaine was just, just on me like she was about money, and
she's telling me she doesn't care how you get the money, just get it.
but she's saying, get it fast, get it done. And I explained to her, I don't want to do this. I don't want, have to do something illegal to, get money, but you want me to do it in a way that's like impossible, and you're like threatening to like leave me, and here I am looking, 2 years of my life is gonna go down the drain. You know what I mean?
He's literally portraying himself as the victim in this scenario. It turns your stomach in that room. It starts eating at you in 360 degrees inside of you to reach out and empathize with this person. But that empathy is the only way to get his confession.
Do I have to do this? Why? You just love me for who I am.
We felt we were getting close. You could see him giving it up more and more. He hasn't said he's done anything. He's just very openly alluded to it. I want him to tell me what he did. I need him saying it.
David, look at me for a second. There's nothing we can do to change the past, right? Okay.
We've all made bad decisions. Some are worse, some aren't so bad. That's what life is. So that's where we are now. I know it can't be easy for you. I don't think you did something necessarily, maliciously. So I know you're in pain over it when you tell us, but it's going to start feeling better.
This is getting me, man.
I know it's hard, man, and I know you're not okay with it. I can see that. You're good. Take your time.
I went up there, and his parents, she was asleep or whatever. It was dark and everything. Of course, it was like 11:30, 11:18, something like that, somewhere in there. I was like, okay, so I just knocked on her door, and I was just like, oh, hey, ma'am, I'm really hungry. I know it's late. You trying to give me something to eat? And she was like, what are you doing here? Because we had some kind of issue. I can't remember what exactly it was. It was just, like, a lot of people, she just decided out of nowhere she just didn't like me for whatever dumbass reason. No reason at all, really, but...
Well, how long did you work for Angie?
Like 2 days.
Okay.
3 days, something like that.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off. So you're out the door.
So she went to just close the door, and like it sounded like she locked it, but I don't know, I guess instinctually I just knew it wasn't, and I just pushed it open, and I seen she was just sitting there on the couch, and she's like, you need some food, you have some food. And I'm like, no, bitch, I'm here for your money. She's like, I ain't got nothing. So I just shot her in the face, and then she was sitting there leaning like this, and I was just so upset because I even had to do this, that I just pistol whipped her in the face. The gun accidentally went off, and she finally fell down, so I might have shot her a third time. I'm not entirely sure. Walked over to her purse, grabbed her wallet and just started going back down the road I came from.
To hear him talk about it with such casual indifference was just agonizing for me. The magnitude of what he did was nowhere to be found in his soul. You realize you're talking to a sociopath. His only regret is that he did it for somebody else, and now he's got to pay the price for it.
How much money did you end up getting?
Not including what possibly was on the credit cards, was about $500.
Credit cards in your book bag also?
Yeah.
Did you get anything else from there?
No, not really.
I know that was hard, and I appreciate you being honest. I know it was difficult.
We got him to confess that he did it. We got his motive. I was there. I knew I was going to have to kill her. I shot her, and I shot her for money. And then I left. And to get motive for the district attorney's office is a huge thing for investigators.
Where's that for, sir?
We wanted to make sure we charge him with everything that he's done. And we want to make sure that he doesn't get away with shooting Angie in the face.
I'm gonna step outside for a minute, okay?
This was one of the very, very few instances that I've investigated where somebody was committing malice murder with every inch of their being. He went there to murder somebody.
Unfortunately, by the time she passed, there were so many health concerns that it went down on paper as undetermined. I was absolutely prepared to draw an indictment for murder. But we have to be able to prove that his action caused the death. Knowing that we could get the sentence based on the crimes that we already charged, it wasn't worth the risk of going to a jury and then saying, maybe not murder.
Manner of death is undetermined. When I read that, I was and am still astounded. It hurts. And it's unfair to her. It's unfair to her memory. And she's someone that doesn't have a voice anymore. So it's our responsibility to be her voice.
When she did finally come to my office and come to court, she was on a walker. She had an oxygen machine. It was hard to speak to her. There was really not much quality of life for her left after this. But she was, at that point, I think, determined to make sure that someone understood what had happened. She was willing to stand up and make sure that he didn't do this to anybody else.
It's just rough sometimes. You know, I still have dreams, things like that, and it's hard. Angie was my second mom, not only an aunt, but somebody that was there as well to, you know, help me grow up and help me raise right. I guess the biggest thing is just that I miss her.
What is the location of your emergency?
We're at the Deluxe, and I don't know the address. Somebody shot. There's someone shot.
You said someone was just shot?
Yes, like literally he's bleeding out right now.
Okay, are you with the guy now?
No, we were in our room. We heard gunshots. It's a motel. I mean, we're just neighbors. We're in another room.
Give me 1 second, okay?
Is there an ambulance on the way, right? 'Cause this guy's like...
Yeah, we've got units en route, okay?
Okay.
I'm talking to the calling card. It just advised that someone was shot and he's bleeding out. There is somebody with the victim. 5 or 6 gunshots. 69304.
Officers arrived on scene, and one of the first things they notice is a victim lying on the ground. He is bleeding. He is not conscious. Citizens were trying to render medical aid to him. He had multiple gunshot wounds to his chest, to his arm, primarily his upper body.
Anybody see anything?
We heard it, and then when we opened up the door, we seen the car speeding off. And then we heard them yelling.
Did you see what kind of car it was?
Red SUV.
Yeah, it's open. It's cracked open.
The victim was located in front of room 123.
It's top police department.
We looked at the registry from the motel, and we were able to identify the victim as Jackie Jerome.
My brother, he was a big-hearted person. He was an amazing brother, very caring. He was a certified nursing assistant. He loved taking care of people and helping everybody.
He was a really, really good guy. He would have given anybody whatever they needed if he had it or had a means to get it to help. He would.
The last thing I ever got from him, it was a GameCube game. I probably played it every day. Because we used to play games together. I just wanted my dad to be there.
There might be one in that door over there.
I know officers had many shell casings that they observed on the ground around where the victim was laying. Officers also observed that there were cameras that were actually at the Deluxe Inn, surveillance cameras. And anything that we can do to figure out who the suspect is or which direction he or she went is a bonus at this point. So I was very excited. You can see shadows, you can see vehicles. You couldn't identify anyone, but you could definitely see their movements and their actions. And it definitely showed that this was not just a random shooting. Our victim was targeted in this incident. So after viewing the video, it is a continuous hunt for this shooter until they are captured.
Police are looking for the suspect who killed a man at a West Wichita motel overnight. The shooting happened around 4 o'clock this morning. Hours after the call of shots fired, police were still at the Deluxe Inn on West Kellogg, still looking at every piece of evidence in every room they could find into a shooting overnight.
There was a picture of his Durango with yellow caution tape all around it in front of a hotel. And it just said that there was a man shot. I felt sick. And almost like it wasn't real, like it wasn't really happening. And I was like, how am I going to tell my kids?
I instantly started bawling. I couldn't believe that it was real. He was such a big part of my life.
We did some research to find out who was actually staying in those rooms right by where his body was. We learned from a witness on scene that the person that had rented those 2 rooms was by the name of Christine Wolf. Christine was someone that we did not believe was an actual suspect. I just wanted to talk to her. So I called the number that we had in our record system. She tells me that she knows that the shooter was Corey Bentley. It's very exciting at this point because we are now able to focus more on that name, his background. There are people searching for Corey. There are people doing research to find out where his friends and family might stay, vehicles he commonly uses, etc., so we can locate him.
One of the officers had a confidential informant that provided information that somebody was trying to sell a stolen vehicle that matched the suspect vehicle in the homicide. Our Violent Crimes Task Force followed up on that information, and they actually ended up locating Corey at an apartment complex. Corey had a pickup for his arrest for first-degree murder. He had a pickup for the felon in possession of a firearm. We know that our firearm that was used in the homicide was not in custody yet, and they had received information that Corey said he's not going back to prison and that he potentially would engage in a shootout with officers.
Cooper, you on the back? Watch out, watch out. Cheers, 33. Hands up! Both hands, mother. Get out here now. Get on the ground. On the ground now. I don't need you talking. On the ground.
Going slow. What the this is? Just going slow. Get down. Y'all don't think nothing. I'm just going slow. Stay down. Y'all don't think nothing. Keep your hands out.
You can shut him down. We have one in custody.
Now, one cigarette, please. Hey,
shut up.
I was confident. I was being cooperative. I just went and grabbed my lighter.
Relax. Relax.
I don't know what
you
this
hear
is
me?
for. I'm scared. What
you hear?
Is this for?
Are you listening? Relax.
Please tell me.
Everything will be explained to you.
Alright, you good? Drink your soda? Detective Perkins. This is Detective Palmer. We're detectives of the Wichita Police Department, okay?
We had surveillance video, interviews from witnesses. But without Corey's actual confession, it's going to be a lot harder for court to get a conviction. I felt that going in and yelling at him or trying to be intimidating to him, that was not a good strategy. So Detective Palmer and I felt like if we went in and just tried to calmly talk to him, that would maybe work in our favor.
Well, Corey, obviously, you know why you're here. There was a homicide that happened yesterday morning out of the Deluxe. Your name has come up. We've talked to a lot of people. We've watched a lot of video, and we've collected a lot of evidence, okay? And I would like to know, your side of all this and exactly what happened out there.
May I ask what is being said? Because I have no problem saying what the hell I know. But everybody's pointing at me, huh?
Well, you are the one sitting here with the pickup. Yeah.
You know, I'm just honest, I really don't recall all of it. I was getting high with that dude before, and he gave me bath salts, and I did not know it until I started freaking out. It's just a spiral from there.
Well, tell me what happened yesterday at the hotel. You're gonna have to talk a little louder. I don't want you to have to keep repeating, okay?
Like, I'm sitting there in this car, freaking out. Like, people walked up to the car and was saying stuff, and he was circling around the car, and then I didn't know what the hell was going on, except I was scared and this guy was causing my fear. I didn't know what to do.
He's not actually crying, but his voice is kind of shaking. I think some of that is real and some of that is a little maybe of a staged type of thing. He has not taken any of this blame for himself. He's almost acting like he's the victim in this and he's the one that should be, coddled like a child.
Who's this guy to you? So you said he gave you bath salts. And did he sell them to you or did he just give them to you?
He sold them to me.
Okay. How much did he sell them to you for?
I only had $15.
Mm-hmm. Did you finish all the $15 worth? Okay. What did you think it was? What did he tell you it was?
Word. Ice.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, I just thought it was a weird cut because it wasn't cracking right. It wasn't.
Yeah. And
then I just started freaking out on everybody. I started getting scared. I just remember the car being surrounded. This last thing I remember.
Is the car, what did you say, the car being surrounded? Okay, I'm just trying to hear, it's hard to understand you. I'm just making sure I understand what I'm hearing from you.
It's hard to say because I know I'm going to jail.
Okay.
I just don't want
I
don't want to die in prison now. All because of meth habit.
It wasn't the bath salts that killed Jackie. Somebody has to physically pull that trigger. I know what the right answer is. They are just not telling it to me. And sometimes you just have to take a chance during these interviews and push a little farther, a little harder.
What was he saying to you when he's around your vehicle or when he's around the vehicle? What do you remember him saying?
I just remember pulling up and the people surrounding him. I just so damn scared of that. And like the guy, he said something and instantly my eyes just locked on him. And I was freaking the out. And I'm like, I just remember screaming for my mom.
You were screaming for your mom?
I screamed for my mom and then ran at her.
In Corey's interview, he finally felt comfortable telling us tiny bits of the truth in very small pieces. I felt that at that point, I think he was almost maybe waiting for someone to stop beating around the bush and just ask the direct question.
Why'd you shoot him?
When somebody's describing an incident to me in great detail, but they're leaving out the detail about the actual incident, I know that they know that missing piece. They're just choosing not to tell us at that point.
Corey, why'd you shoot him? How many times you recall pulling the trigger?
I kept going and going and going until it was gone, and I kept going and going and going.
Did you unload the gun? You unload the clip?
It was pulled back.
Okay.
And I kept trying.
Okay. And you remember that when you shot him, you kept shooting.
Even after this locked up.
Even after it locked back? Okay. So you're moving your finger like you're still pulling the trigger.
And I kept going.
Okay.
When he finally started telling us the truth, it just kind of flooded out of him. You know, sometimes pushing them to that point gets those floodgates open and they just continue to talk and tell us what really happened. He's given us a reason why. Now we have that confession, but you don't want to stop there. You still want as much information as you can get.
And had he fallen down by then? Did he have a gun? Did you see a gun in his hand? Was he doing anything to you? Did he ever touch you?
He was yelling around the car.
Okay.
And I just made him. Oh man. I should have told my attorney that first.
No, that's up to you, okay?
I should have told my attorney before I made these statements.
So his demeanor changed when he starts talking about, I just confessed, I just told you what happened. I think he's starting to understand the gravity of what's going on.
Okay, well, you've mentioned wanting an attorney, and at this point, that's your right. We're gonna go ahead and step out, okay? Hang tight.
That ain't right, man. You guys can't do that. You guys played me.
The way Corey described what he had done, his confession was not 100% exactly what occurred. But he was able to give me enough detail of what he did to put himself there. So I had all the puzzle pieces together. I also had great witness statements. And I really felt like the information that I had at that moment was enough to continue on with this case to get it charged.
Mom, they can't save me this time. Stand up.
This was a successful ending, although, truly these cases have no good endings. We always try to go back and find any connection with our victim and our suspect, and there was no evidence at all during this investigation that Jackie sold anything, including bath salts, to Corey Bentley. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I find that terribly sad for him and his family.
Yeah, it's the car I drive every day. It's just something I never want to leave because it's the last thing I have from him. It's the last thing he loved. Everyone said that it was his baby. It's nothing special, but it was his. So as long as I have that vehicle, I feel like he's still here.
Jack's memory lives on. He gets to sit where his father once sat and drive that vehicle proudly, just like his father would have wanted him to. And I know he's going to go on being who his father was. He is definitely a spitting image.
At approximately 2:28 in the morning on April 11th, 1995, a 19-year-old woman stood alone beside a public telephone booth in Munich, Germany. It was late, but not unusually so for a young adult returning home after a night out with friends. The city around her was quiet. Public transportation was still running. She had a simple plan. She intended to make a phone call to her sister and ask for a ride home. That call was never made. Within what investigators believe may have been only a matter of minutes, the young woman vanished. No one heard a scream. No one reported a struggle. No confirmed witness ever came forward to say they had seen exactly what happened after that moment. And for more than 25 years, nobody could even prove whether she was alive or dead. Her name was Sonia Engelbrecht. Today, her case remains one of the most haunting and perplexing unsolved murder investigations in modern German criminal history. Some true crime cases begin with violence. Others begin with a body discovered in a remote location. Some begin with a suspect already known to police. The case of Sonia Engelbrecht begins with something far more unsettling: absence. An ordinary young woman disappears from a public place in one of Germany's largest cities and leaves behind virtually nothing. No clear crime scene. No known motive. No reliable eyewitnesses. No identified offender. Just questions. Questions that would torment investigators, journalists, and Sonia's family for decades. How does a person simply disappear in the middle of a major city? How does someone vanish from a location that should have been relatively safe? What happened in the brief period between a friend boarding a tram and a phone call that was never placed? And perhaps most troubling of all, if a crime occurred, who managed to hide the truth for so long? To understand why the case continues to fascinate investigators even today, it is important to appreciate how little information existed during those first critical hours. On the night of April 10th, 1995, Sonia Engelbrecht went out with friends. There was nothing unusual about the evening, nothing that would later stand out as an obvious warning sign. No known argument, no reported threats, no indication that she feared for her safety. For her family, it was simply another evening. For Sonia, it was likely no different. Yet sometime after midnight, a sequence of ordinary decisions would place her at the center of a mystery that remains unresolved more than 3 decades later. The final confirmed moments of Sonia's life are remarkably simple. She spent the evening socializing. She left the gathering with a male acquaintance. The two walked together toward Stiegelmeierplatz, a well-known square in Munich. She planned to call her sister. Her companion handed her a phone card. He boarded a tram. She remained behind. That is the last point at which investigators can confidently place Sonia Engelbrecht. Imagine that moment for a second. Not because there is anything extraordinary about it, but because there isn't. That is precisely what makes it so disturbing. There was no dramatic confrontation witnessed by strangers. No frantic attempt to escape. No obvious sign that danger was approaching. Instead, there was only a young woman standing beside a telephone booth, preparing to make a routine call home. And she was gone. When people think about disappearances, they often imagine remote highways, isolated forests, or dangerous neighborhoods. They picture circumstances that seem inherently risky. But the Sonia Engelbrecht case challenges those assumptions. This disappearance occurred in Munich, a modern European city, a place filled with homes, roads, businesses, and public transportation. A place where countless people moved through the streets every day. Yet somehow, despite all of that, the crucial events that followed remain hidden. Investigators would spend years attempting to reconstruct those missing minutes. Did someone approach Sonia before she could use the telephone? Did she willingly leave the area? Did she encounter somebody she knew? Did she accept a ride? Was she forced into a vehicle? Or did something entirely different happen? The frustrating truth is that no one knows. And because the answers vanished with Sonia, every theory has had to confront the same obstacle: a profound lack of evidence. In the years that followed, police would interview witnesses, examine timelines, and pursue countless leads. A specialized investigative team would eventually be assigned to the case. Family members would refuse to give up hope. Journalists would revisit the mystery again and again. Television programs would feature the disappearance. Private investigators would become involved. Still, the mystery remained. Months turned into years. Years turned into decades. The disappearance gradually transformed from an active missing person investigation into something even more unsettling: a cold case. For Sonia's family, time created a cruel paradox. Every passing year reduced the likelihood of finding answers. Yet every passing year also made it impossible to stop searching. Without proof of death, uncertainty lingered. Without a body, there could be no definitive conclusion. Without a suspect, there could be no arrest. Without answers, there could be no real closure. The case existed in a strange and painful state between hope and despair. Some missing person investigations end quickly. Others end when evidence finally reveals the truth. This one seemed destined to remain suspended forever. Then, 25 years later, something happened. In a remote forest near the Bavarian town of Kipfenberg, roughly 100 kilometers from where Sonia disappeared, a forestry worker made an unexpected discovery: a human bone. What initially appeared to be an isolated forensic find would ultimately reopen one of Germany's most famous cold cases. The discovery would answer one question that had haunted investigators since 1995, but it would also create many new ones. Because while the remains would finally confirm that Sonia Engelbrecht had died, they would not reveal who killed her. They would not explain how she left Munich. They would not identify where she was murdered. And they would not identify the person responsible. Even now, after decades of investigation, after extensive searches, after DNA analysis, after renewed public appeals, the central mystery remains unsolved. Someone knows what happened to Sonia Engelbrecht. Someone knows how a 19-year-old woman disappeared after being left alone beside a telephone booth. Someone knows why her remains were hidden in a remote location far from the place where she was last seen. And someone has managed to keep those secrets for more than 30 years. This is not merely the story of a disappearance. It is the story of unanswered questions. It is the story of a family forced to endure decades of uncertainty. It is the story of investigators chasing fragments of evidence across generations. And it is the story of a young woman whose ordinary night out became one of the most enduring mysteries in German criminal history. To understand how that mystery began, we must first understand who Sonia Engelbrecht was before she became a headline, before she became a case file, and before her name became synonymous with one of Germany's most haunting unsolved crimes, before she became the subject of newspaper headlines, television appeals, and one of Germany's most enduring unsolved criminal investigations. Sonia Engelbrecht was simply a young woman at the beginning of her adult life. That fact is easy to lose sight of when discussing a case that has become defined by mystery. The unanswered questions, the missing years, and the frustrating lack of resolution often dominate conversations about the investigation. Yet at the center of this story is not a case file or a police report. At the center is a 19-year-old woman whose future abruptly disappeared alongside her. Understanding who Sonia was is essential because it helps explain why her disappearance immediately alarmed those who knew her and why investigators ultimately rejected the idea that she had simply chosen to walk away from her life. Sonia Engelbrecht was born on April 4th, 1976, in Munich, the capital of Bavaria and one of Germany's largest cities. By the spring of 1995, she had recently celebrated her 19th birthday. Like many young adults her age, she stood at a transitional point in life. Childhood was behind her, but the future was still taking shape. Important decisions about education, work, relationships, and independence lay ahead. According to those who knew her, Sonia approached that future with a sense of responsibility and stability. She was not known as someone who lived recklessly or impulsively. Friends and family described her as relatively private, dependable, and grounded. At the time she disappeared, Sonia was attending a vocational economics school. In addition to her studies, she was completing an internship at a law office. These details may seem small compared to the dramatic events that would later unfold, but they reveal important aspects of her character. Her education required commitment. Her internship suggested that she was actively preparing for a professional future, rather than drifting through early adulthood without direction. Sonia appeared to be building a foundation for the years ahead. Investigators later examined every available aspect of her life, searching for clues that might explain why she vanished. They looked for hidden conflicts, secret plans, financial problems, troubled relationships, or any indication that she intended to leave voluntarily. What they found instead was a young woman whose life appeared remarkably ordinary. In criminal investigations, ordinary can be significant. Many disappearances eventually reveal warning signs that become obvious in hindsight. Sometimes a missing person had spoken about leaving. Sometimes there were serious family conflicts. Sometimes financial troubles, emotional crises, or dangerous associations provide a possible explanation. In Sonia's case, investigators struggled to identify such factors. There was no evidence suggesting she wanted to disappear. There was no indication that she had been preparing to start a new life elsewhere. Her belongings remained where they had always been. Her savings were untouched. The routines of her daily life offered no obvious hint that she was planning to abandon them. This is one reason her disappearance quickly stood apart from many other missing person cases. Family members repeatedly emphasized that her behavior before April 1995 had given them no reason to believe she would voluntarily sever contact with everyone she knew. To understand their concern, it is important to appreciate the nature of family relationships before mobile phones became an everyday part of life. In 1995, communication worked differently. Young adults often called home from public telephones. Plans could change during the evening, but people generally informed family members if they expected to be late. According to those close to Sonia, she was responsible in this regard. She rarely disappeared without explanation. She maintained regular contact with family members and did not have a history of suddenly vanishing. 4 days at a time. When she failed to return home, concern emerged quickly because the behavior was so unlike her. Sonia's life unfolded against the backdrop of Munich in the mid-1990s. The city was already one of Germany's major cultural and economic centers. Public transportation connected neighborhoods across the metropolitan area. Young adults regularly met friends, visited bars, attended gatherings, and relied on trams and trains to move around the city. In many respects, Sonia's social life appears entirely typical for someone her age. Going out with friends was not unusual. Meeting acquaintances, spending an evening talking, listening to music, and sharing drinks represented normal experiences for countless young people throughout Munich. Nothing in the available evidence suggests that April 10th, 1995, was expected to be anything other than another ordinary evening. This normality is one of the most haunting elements of the case. There was no known event marking the night as special. There was no major celebration, no important announcement, no dramatic confrontation, no known crisis. The evening began in a manner so routine that nobody present could have imagined it would become the focus of a criminal investigation lasting decades. Looking back from the perspective of the present, it is tempting to search for signs that disaster was approaching. Human beings naturally want causes and explanations. We prefer stories in which warning signs are visible and outcomes feel inevitable. The reality is often far less satisfying. Sometimes tragedy emerges from circumstances that appear completely ordinary until viewed through the lens of hindsight. The portrait that emerges of Sonia Engelbrecht is not one of a person living on the margins of society. It is not the portrait of someone caught in dangerous criminal networks or spiraling into personal crisis. Instead, it is the portrait of a young woman building a future. She was studying. She was working. She maintained relationships with family and friends. She lived a structured life. These characteristics would later shape the direction of the investigation. Because investigators found no convincing evidence that she planned to disappear voluntarily, attention increasingly focused on the possibility that something had happened to her against her will. Yet proving that possibility would become extraordinarily difficult. In the absence of a body, a crime scene, or direct witnesses, police faced an enormous challenge. The very qualities that made Sonia's disappearance seem suspicious also highlighted how little evidence existed to explain it. Family members found themselves trapped in a painful uncertainty. On one hand, they had every reason to believe that something terrible had occurred. On the other hand, they lacked definitive proof. For years, they lived in the space between hope and fear. Every reported sighting, every new lead, and every rumor carried the possibility of an answer. At the same time, every passing month deepened the realization that finding that answer might become increasingly difficult. As investigators examined Sonia's background, they repeatedly returned to the same conclusion. Nothing about her known circumstances suggested she intended to leave. This conclusion would become one of the foundations of the case. It helped sustain investigative efforts long after many missing person files might have faded into obscurity. It also contributed to the widespread public interest that developed over the years. People looked at Sonia's story and recognized something unsettling. She represented someone who could have been a neighbor, a classmate, a co-worker, or a friend. Her life reflected ordinary ambitions and ordinary routines. Her disappearance appeared to have emerged from an ordinary evening. Yet the outcome was anything but ordinary. The more investigators learned about who Sonia was, the more difficult it became to explain why she was gone. And so, as the evening of April 10th, 1995 unfolded, nobody around her had any reason to believe they were witnessing the final hours of a life that would soon become the subject of one of Germany's most famous unsolved mysteries. Sonia Engelbrecht left home that night as a 19-year-old student with plans for the future. By the following morning, she would be missing. Before long, an ordinary evening out with friends would become the starting point of a mystery that investigators would spend decades trying to solve. The evening of April 10th, 1995, began without any indication that it would become one of the most scrutinized nights in German criminal history. For Sonia Engelbrecht, it appeared to be an ordinary social outing. There were no known signs of danger, no reported threats, and no reason for her family to suspect that the night would end differently from countless evenings before it. Yet, as investigators would later discover, the ordinary nature of those hours made the events that followed even more difficult to explain. At approximately 9 p.m., Sonia left home to meet a former acquaintance named Mark Bertel. The two knew each other, though available information indicates they were not especially close friends. Their meeting was not described as unusual, nor did it attract any particular attention at the time. Like many young adults in Munich, they planned to spend the evening socializing. From there, they met additional friends and traveled together to a bar known as Zoomvolment. Nothing in the known evidence suggests that any significant incident occurred there. The group spent time together in what appears to have been a typical social setting. They talked, drank, and enjoyed the evening. Eventually, the gathering moved from the bar to an apartment located on Skellingstrasse in Munich. There, the group continued their night. Witness accounts later indicated that the atmosphere remained relaxed. People listened to music, talked, and drank beer. Investigators would later examine these hours in extraordinary detail. Every movement, every conversation remembered by witnesses, every arrival and departure became important. Detectives searched for disagreements, suspicious behavior, signs of tension, or anything that might suggest a developing conflict. Yet according to the accounts available, no major argument occurred. No confrontation was reported. No witness described Sonia as distressed, frightened, or eager to leave because of a problem. If danger existed that night, it did not make itself visible to the people around her. This absence of warning signs would become one of the most frustrating aspects of the case. The final known hours of Sonia's life appeared entirely normal. As the night continued into the early morning of April 11th, the gathering gradually came to an end. Around 2:15 a.m., Sonia and Mark Bertel left the apartment together. Their destination was Stiegelmeierplatz, a public square and transportation hub in Munich. The walk itself would later become a focus of investigative attention because it represented the last confirmed period during which Sonia's movements could be reconstructed with some degree of certainty. Detectives would later attempt to establish every detail of this journey. What route did they take? Did they encounter anyone? Did anything unusual happen along the way? Unfortunately, no evidence emerged that significantly altered the known timeline. By all available accounts, the walk was uneventful. When they arrived at Stiegelmeierplatz, Sonia planned to call her sister and ask for a ride home. This detail is significant because it provides one of the clearest indicators of her intentions that night. She was not preparing to disappear. She was preparing to go home. According to the known account, this was something she had done before when returning late from social outings. The plan was simple and practical. She would use a public telephone booth, contact her sister, and arrange transportation home. In retrospect, that intended phone call became one of the most important facts in the entire investigation. At the time, however, it likely seemed completely routine. Mark Bertel reportedly gave Sonia a phone card so she could make the call. Shortly afterward, his tram arrived. According to his later statements, he boarded the tram while Sonia remained behind near the telephone booth. As the tram departed, he could still see her standing there. Investigators would later determine that this occurred at approximately 2:28 a.m. That moment has become frozen in the history of the case. It represents the final confirmed sighting of Sonia Engelbrecht. No verified witness has ever been able to place her anywhere after that point. No one can say with certainty where she went, who she encountered, or what happened next. In many missing person cases, investigators have at least a rough idea of the circumstances surrounding the disappearance. In Sonia's case, the timeline effectively ends at the telephone booth. Beyond that point lies a void. One of the most critical discoveries made during the investigation concerned the phone call itself. Police examined telephone records associated with the public booth. They expected to find evidence that Sonia had called home. Instead, they found nothing. No call had been placed to her family's residence. This discovery transformed the investigation. If Sonia never made the call, then something must have happened before she had the opportunity to do so. The implications were profound. The telephone booth was no longer simply the location where she was last seen. It became the location where investigators believed the mystery truly began. The fact that the call was never made narrowed the timeline dramatically. The period between Mark's departure and Sonia's disappearance may have been extraordinarily brief. Detectives began considering what could have happened during those missing minutes. One possibility was that someone approached Sonia before she could use the phone. Another was that she voluntarily left the area with someone. Yet another possibility was that she encountered a person she knew and chose to leave with them. Each scenario carried different implications, but all shared one problem. There was no evidence strong enough to confirm any of them. The absence of the phone call created questions that investigators would continue asking for. Decades. Why did Sonia fail to contact her sister? Did she change her plans voluntarily? Was she interrupted? Did she leave the location willingly, or was she forced to leave? These questions became central to every theory that followed. The challenge was that no witness could provide the missing piece of the puzzle. Nobody reported seeing Sonia use the telephone. Nobody reported seeing her get into a vehicle. Nobody reported seeing an abduction. Nobody reported hearing a disturbance. For investigators, this lack of information was almost as significant as the evidence they did possess. It suggested that whatever happened occurred quickly and without attracting attention. Stiegelmeyer-Platz was not an isolated forest road or a remote mountain trail. It was part of a major city. Yet despite that fact, the disappearance unfolded without producing the kind of witness testimony that often drives criminal investigations forward. As the hours passed and dawn approached, Sonia failed to return home. At first, there was no immediate reason for panic. Delays happen. Plans change. Transportation can be missed. But as time continued to pass, concern grew. The expected phone call never arrived. Sonia never appeared at home. Family members who knew her understood that this behavior was highly unusual. The young woman who had intended to call for a ride had simply vanished. Looking back now, investigators often focus on the narrow window after 2:28 a.m. because it represents the final opportunity to understand what happened. Somewhere within those minutes lies the answer to the case. Somewhere between the moment Mark boarded the tram and the moment Sonia disappeared, a sequence of events occurred that altered the course of countless lives. Yet despite decades of effort, those events remain hidden. The tragedy of the Sonia Engelbrecht case is not only that a young woman disappeared, it is that the disappearance occurred at the very edge of visibility. Investigators can reconstruct the evening before it. They can analyze the years that followed. They can examine the evidence discovered decades later. But the crucial moment itself remains obscured. It exists in a gap between known facts and unanswered questions. A 19-year-old woman stood beside a telephone booth intending to call home. The call was never made. By morning, she was gone. And as her family's concern turned into fear, a missing person case was about to become one of Germany's most enduring criminal mysteries. When the sun rose over Munich on April 11th, 1995, nobody yet realized that a mystery had begun. At first, there was only concern. Sonia Engelbrecht had not returned home. The phone call she intended to make had never come. Hours passed without explanation. For many families, a delayed return might be irritating or worrying, but not necessarily alarming. Young adults occasionally change plans, miss transportation, stay with friends, or simply fail to communicate. Yet those closest to Sonia quickly sensed that something was wrong. Her absence did not fit the pattern of behavior they knew. She was not someone who routinely disappeared without notice. She was not known for abandoning responsibilities or leaving family members wondering where she was. The longer she remained missing, the more unusual the situation appeared. Eventually, her family reported her disappearance to police. What happened next would become one of the most debated aspects of the entire case. Like many law enforcement agencies during that period, police initially approached the matter through the lens of a missing adult investigation. Sonia was 19 years old. Legally, she was an adult. There was no immediate evidence proving that a crime had occurred. No witness had reported an abduction. No physical evidence suggested violence. No body had been discovered. As a result, investigators initially considered the possibility that she had left voluntarily. This assumption was not unique to the Sonia Engelbrecht case. Around the world, countless adult missing person reports begin with similar questions. Has the individual chosen to leave? Are they staying with friends? Could they return on their own? In many cases, such assumptions prove correct. But in cases where a crime has actually occurred, those early hours can become critically important. Looking back, many observers would later criticize the initial response. The concern was not necessarily that investigators ignored the disappearance, but that precious time may have been lost before the full seriousness of the situation was recognized. Once time passes, evidence becomes harder to recover. Witness memories begin to fade. Potential leads become more difficult to verify. Opportunities that exist during the first hours of an investigation may never return. In Sonia's case, critics would later point to several areas of concern. The area around Stiegelmeierplatz was not immediately preserved as a potential crime scene. Witness identification efforts were not launched on the scale that might occur in a suspected abduction investigation. Vehicles present in the area during the relevant period were not immediately identified and tracked. None of these observations prove that the case would have been solved had different decisions been made. However, they highlight the enormous challenge investigators faced once they realized Sonia was not simply going to come home. As concern grew, the disappearance gradually shifted from a routine missing person report into something much more serious. Detectives began examining Sonia's background in detail. They reviewed her relationships, habits, education, employment, and recent activities. Their goal was simple: determine whether there was any plausible reason she might have vanished voluntarily. The results were frustratingly consistent. Everything investigators learned seemed to reinforce the same conclusion. Sonia had plans for the future. She was attending school. She was completing an internship. She maintained close family connections. She left behind her belongings and savings. There was no obvious explanation for a voluntary disappearance. As this realization took hold, police intensified their efforts. The investigation eventually became substantial enough to warrant the formation of a dedicated task force known as SOCO Sonia. The name reflected the case that had come to dominate investigators' attention. The purpose of the task force was straightforward: bring together resources, personnel, and expertise focused specifically on solving the mystery of Sonia Engelbrecht's disappearance. Over time, investigators interviewed more than 80 witnesses. Each interview represented a potential breakthrough. Every person who had seen Sonia, spoken with her, or crossed paths with her during the final hours became important. Detectives attempted to reconstruct her movements with precision. They revisited the events of April 10th and April 11th repeatedly. They compared statements. They analyzed timelines. They searched for inconsistencies. Yet despite extensive efforts, the investigation repeatedly encountered the same problem. There was remarkably little evidence. Many criminal investigations advance through a combination of physical evidence and eyewitness testimony. In Sonia's case, both were limited. There was no confirmed crime scene. There was no body. There were no direct witnesses to whatever happened after 2:28 a.m. The disappearance seemed to occur inside a vacuum. This absence of evidence created a series of investigative obstacles that would define the case for decades. The first obstacle was the lack of a known crime scene. Investigators did not know where Sonia had gone after leaving Stiegelmeierplatz. Consequently, they did not know where any crime may have occurred. Without a crime scene, there could be no forensic examination of the location. There could be no recovery of physical evidence tied directly to the disappearance. Detectives were left searching without knowing where to search. The second obstacle was the absence of eyewitnesses. Nobody could reliably describe Sonia's movements after the final confirmed sighting. Nobody reported seeing her enter a vehicle. Nobody reported witnessing an assault. Nobody came forward with information that clearly explained her disappearance. The third obstacle was the absence of a body. For decades, investigators did not know whether Sonia was alive or dead. This uncertainty complicated every aspect of the case. If she was alive, where was she? If she was dead, where were her remains? Without answers to those questions, investigators found themselves trapped between multiple possibilities. The fourth obstacle was time itself. Every passing month made the investigation more difficult. Witness memories faded. Potential evidence disappeared. Leads became harder to verify. The passage of time transformed an already difficult investigation into one of Germany's most challenging cold cases. Among all the individuals connected to Sonia's final known movements, one person naturally attracted particular attention: Mark Bertel. This was not because investigators possessed evidence linking him to a crime. Rather, it was because he was the last confirmed person known to have seen Sonia alive. In virtually any disappearance investigation, the final known contact becomes an important focus. Detectives carefully examined Mark's statements. They verified aspects of his account where possible. They reviewed his movements. They analyzed his timeline. They explored his relationships and background. He was interviewed multiple times over the years. Investigators sought to determine whether any contradiction or inconsistency existed that might indicate involvement in the disappearance. Yet despite extensive scrutiny, no evidence emerged linking him directly to the crime. He was never charged in connection with Sonia's disappearance. As traditional investigative avenues produced few answers, detectives increasingly turned toward theories. The challenge was that each theory had strengths and weaknesses, and none could be proven. One of the most discussed possibilities involved a sexual predator. Investigators considered this scenario plausible because Sonia was alone in the early morning hours. The area around the telephone booth may have presented an opportunity for someone seeking a vulnerable target. If an offender approached her before she made the call, the disappearance could potentially be explained. This theory gained additional attention because police would later come to believe that a sexually motivated crime was a likely possibility, yet without direct evidence from the time of the disappearance. The theory remained only that, a theory. Another possibility involved a voluntary ride. Perhaps Sonia accepted transportation from someone. Late at night, with plans disrupted and no phone call completed. Such a decision might seem reasonable under certain circumstances. However, investigators could never establish whether this occurred. There is also the possibility that Sonia encountered someone she knew. This theory attempted to explain how she might have left the area without attracting attention. A familiar face could have lowered her guard and encouraged her to change her plans. Yet again, no evidence emerged to identify such a person. The limitation shared by every theory was the same. None could be proven. Detectives possessed possibilities, but not answers. As years passed, the case increasingly attracted public attention. Sonia's family refused to stop searching. They participated in appeals for information. Media coverage kept the case in public view. Television programs revisited the disappearance. Private investigators became involved. Each new effort carried hope that someone, somewhere, might finally provide the missing piece of information. Yet the mystery endured. Year after year, the case remained open. New leads appeared and disappeared. Potential sightings failed to produce results. Investigators continued working, but certainty remained elusive. What made the case particularly haunting was the contrast between the enormous amount of effort invested and the small amount of definitive information obtained. Everyone knew where Sonia had last been seen. Everyone knew approximately when she vanished. Yet nobody knew what happened next. By the early 21st century, the disappearance of Sonia Engelbrecht had become more than an active investigation. It had become a cold case, a file filled with interviews, timelines, theories, and unanswered questions. For investigators, the challenge was no longer simply finding a missing woman. It was solving a mystery that had resisted explanation for years. Then, after decades of uncertainty, a discovery made far from Munich would dramatically alter the direction of the case and finally answer one of its most fundamental questions. For more than 2 decades after Sonia Engelbrecht's disappearance, the case existed in a state of unresolved uncertainty. Investigators had exhausted early leads, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and constructed multiple theories, yet none had produced a definitive answer. The absence of a body remained one of the most significant barriers to understanding what had truly happened in the early hours of April 11th, 1995. Without physical remains, the case remained anchored in possibility rather than certainty. That changed in the summer of 2020, when a discovery in a remote forested region of Bavaria introduced the first tangible evidence in more than 25 years. A forestry worker operating in the area near the town of Kipfenberg, approximately 100 kilometers from Munich, came across what appeared to be a human bone. At first, there was no immediate indication that this find would alter one of Germany's most enduring cold cases. Human remains can surface in remote natural environments for many reasons. And without identification, such discoveries often remain isolated forensic incidents. However, the bone was recovered and submitted for forensic analysis, initiating a chain of events that would ultimately reshape the entire investigation. Specialists conducted DNA testing on the recovered material, carefully comparing genetic markers against missing persons databases. The process was meticulous, as even small fragments of biological material can take time to yield reliable results. When the analysis was complete, the outcome was both definitive and deeply significant. The remains belonged to Sonia Engelbrecht. After 25 years of uncertainty, investigators finally had scientific confirmation that she was no longer alive. This identification marked a turning point in the case. Until that moment, Sonia's fate had remained officially unresolved. There had always been the possibility, however remote, that she might still be alive somewhere. The DNA confirmation removed that ambiguity entirely. For investigators and for her family, it represented the end of one form of uncertainty and the beginning of another. The question was no longer whether she had survived, but what had happened to her and how she had come to be in such a remote location far from where she was last seen. The geographical context of the discovery quickly became a focal point for investigators. Kipfenberg is situated in a rural, heavily forested region characterized by uneven terrain, dense vegetation, and rocky formations. The location where the bone was found lay approximately 100 kilometers from Munich. the city where Sonia had disappeared in 1995. This distance immediately raised important investigative questions. Sonia had vanished in an urban environment, yet her remains were discovered in a remote natural setting far outside the city. This suggested that at some point after her disappearance, her body had been transported or moved to this secluded area. The implications of this realization were profound. It indicated a level of intent and effort beyond a spontaneous act. It suggested that whoever was responsible had taken deliberate steps to conceal what had happened. In the years following the initial discovery, investigators expanded their search efforts in the surrounding area. The terrain near Kipfenberg is known for its steep inclines and difficult-to-access sections, including rocky crevices and densely wooded zones. These environmental factors made systematic searching challenging, but authorities nonetheless committed to a more comprehensive examination of the region. In 2022, these renewed efforts led to additional discoveries. During organized search operations, investigators located further human remains belonging to Sonia Engelbrecht. The recovery of multiple fragments confirmed that the site contained more than a single isolated bone and represented a broader burial or concealment location. The positioning of the remains provided additional insight into how the body had been treated after death. Investigators observed that the remains had been placed deep within a rocky crevice, a location that would not be easily visible or accessible without deliberate effort to search that specific area. This suggested intentional concealment rather than accidental deposition. Further forensic examination revealed additional details that significantly influenced investigative interpretations. Evidence indicated that the remains had previously been wrapped or covered using plastic materials and substances consistent with construction-related materials. These findings suggested that the body had been deliberately prepared for concealment before being placed in the location where it was eventually discovered. Such actions are typically interpreted by investigators as attempts to delay or prevent discovery. The use of materials associated with construction or renovation work also introduced new lines of inquiry. Investigators considered whether the individual responsible might have had familiarity with such materials through occupation or personal experience. However, no specific individual was identified as a result of this observation alone. The discovery of these remains transformed the investigation in another critical way. It allowed authorities to confirm that Sonia had not only died, but that her body had been deliberately hidden. This distinction was important. It suggested that the events following her disappearance were not random or incidental, but involved actions taken with the purpose of concealing evidence. Despite these developments, many fundamental questions remained unanswered. The most important of these was still the identity of the person responsible. Even with the recovery of remains and the advancement of forensic analysis, no suspect could be definitively linked to the crime. Investigators did not identify a perpetrator, and no arrests were made. The case remained open, classified as an unsolved homicide. In the wake of the discoveries, authorities continued to pursue modern investigative methods, including expanded DNA collection efforts in and around the Kipfenberg area. The goal of these initiatives was to identify potential genetic matches that might connect individuals to the forensic evidence recovered at the site. These efforts represented a shift toward contemporary forensic science, reflecting how advances in technology can reopen possibilities in long cold cases. However, despite these renewed efforts, no conclusive match has yet been reported, and no individual has been formally charged in connection with Sonia Engelbrecht's death. As of 2025 and into 2026, the case remains officially unsolved. Law enforcement agencies continue to classify it as an active cold case, meaning it remains open and subject to ongoing review. Investigators still examine leads, evaluate forensic data, and consider new analytical techniques as they become available. Yet the core mystery persists. The discovery of Sonia's remains answered one of the most painful questions for her family, confirming that she had died. However, it simultaneously deepened the central mystery by failing to explain how or why her life ended, or who was responsible. The distance between Munich, where she was last seen alive, and Kipfenberg, where her remains were discovered, remains one of the key unanswered elements of the case. It represents not only a physical gap, but also a narrative gap in understanding the sequence of events that led from her disappearance to the concealment of her body. Investigators continue to consider multiple possibilities, but without a suspect or direct evidence linking a specific individual to the crime. The case remains open-ended. The forensic findings suggest deliberate concealment, possible familiarity with a remote location, and the use of materials that indicate some level of planning. Yet these conclusions, while significant, do not identify a perpetrator. They only outline the behavior of someone still unknown. For Sonia Engelbrecht's family, the discovery brought a form of closure that had been absent for decades, but it also marked the continuation of a painful search for truth. The certainty of death did not replace the absence of answers. Instead, it reframed the questions that had existed since 1995. What happened in those final minutes at Stiegelmeierplatz? Who was involved in her disappearance? And how did she come to be hidden in a remote forest far from home? These questions remain unresolved. Despite advances in forensic science, renewed investigations, and sustained public interest, the identity of the individual responsible for Sonia Engelbrecht's death has not been established. The case continues to stand as one of Germany's most prominent unsolved homicide investigations, defined by a rare combination of limited early evidence, a prolonged period without physical remains, and a discovery that confirmed death without revealing accountability. In this sense, the case exists in two timelines: the historical timeline of 1995, when Sonia disappeared without explanation, and the modern timeline beginning in 2020, when science confirmed what had long been suspected but never proven. Between those 2 points lies a gap that has yet to be filled. That gap remains the central focus of ongoing investigative efforts. And until it is closed, the story of Sonia Engelbrecht remains unfinished. The discovery of Sonia Engelbrecht's remains in 2020 fundamentally changed the emotional landscape of the case, but did not resolve its central mystery. For 25 years, her disappearance existed in a state of ambiguity, suspended between hope and dread. Her family lived without certainty, unable to grieve fully because there was no confirmation of death, yet unable to move forward because there was no evidence of life. When DNA testing finally confirmed that the remains found near Kipfenberg belonged to Sonia, that ambiguity ended in a scientific sense. But emotionally, it marked the beginning of a different kind of suffering. The transition from missing to confirmed deceased is often described in criminal investigations as closure. But in reality, it rarely feels like closure to those left behind. Instead, it replaces one form of uncertainty with another. The certainty of loss paired with the uncertainty of meaning. The most painful question that remained was no longer whether Sonia was alive, but what had happened to her in the moments after she was last seen at Stiegelmeierplatz. That question has never been answered. The absence of a suspect continues to define the case. Despite extensive investigation spanning decades, no individual has been officially identified as responsible for Sonia Engelbrecht's death. There has been no trial, no indictment, and no conviction. The case remains classified as an unsolved homicide, an active cold case within German law enforcement systems. Investigators continue to review the file periodically, applying modern forensic methods and re-examining evidence collected from the Kipfenberg site. However, the fundamental limitation remains unchanged. There is no direct link between any known person and the crime scene or remains. What makes the case particularly enduring in the public imagination is the simplicity of its beginning contrasted with the complexity of its aftermath. A 19-year-old woman stands beside a public telephone booth in a major European city. She intends to call her sister. She is waiting for a tram to pass, for a friend to leave, for a normal evening to end. And then she disappears. There is no confirmed struggle, no verified witness accounts of violence, no immediate indication of abduction. The disappearance appears to occur within a narrow window of time, so small that it almost defies comprehension. That narrowness is part of what continues to haunt investigators. In many criminal cases, the passage of time gradually reveals additional clues or witnesses come forward with new information. In this case, the passage of time did the opposite. It erased possibilities. It reduced the number of people who might have seen something. It weakened memories. It dissolved potential evidence long before it could be properly analyzed. By the time the remains were discovered in 2020, more than 2 decades had passed since the critical events. The environment in which Sonia disappeared had changed. The people who might have been present that night had moved on with their lives. Some may no longer remember the details of that evening. Others may not even realize they saw something significant. Investigators faced not only a missing perpetrator, but a missing historical context. One of the most persistent unanswered questions remains the journey between Munich and Kipfenberg. Sonia disappeared in an urban environment. Her remains were found in a remote forest approximately 100 kilometers away. This geographic separation implies movement after her death, or at least after her disappearance. It suggests deliberate transportation and concealment. The decision to place her remains in a rocky crevice within a forested area indicates familiarity with the terrain, or at least purposeful selection of a location unlikely to be disturbed. The use of plastic wrapping and construction-related materials further suggests intentional efforts to conceal evidence. These details, while informative, do not identify who is responsible. They only describe actions taken by someone still unknown. Investigators have considered whether the perpetrator might have had a connection to construction work or materials, or whether they may have known the Kipfenberg area well enough to select it as a disposal site. However, such considerations remain speculative without corroborating evidence. No individual has been linked definitively to these characteristics. Another enduring question involves the final moments at Stiegelmeierplatz. The timeline is precise but incomplete. Sonia was last seen at approximately 2:28 a.m. She stood beside a telephone booth intending to call her sister. The call was never made. No confirmed witness saw what happened immediately afterward. The lack of surveillance footage, which was far less common in 1995 than it is today, leaves a gap that cannot be filled retrospectively. Investigators can reconstruct the sequence leading up to that moment, but not beyond it. That gap remains the point at which the case becomes invisible. Over the years, multiple theories have been considered. One suggests that Sonia may have been approached by an unknown individual acting opportunistically, possibly with criminal intent. Another suggests she may have encountered someone she knew, someone not initially considered suspect. A third considers the possibility that she accepted a ride from someone, voluntarily or under misleading circumstances. Each theory attempts to explain how she left a public place without attracting attention. Yet none of these theories can be confirmed. No physical evidence ties any specific scenario to the events of that night. The absence of a suspect continues to be one of the most significant obstacles. Despite advances in forensic science, including DNA analysis and modern investigative techniques, no match has been identified from the material recovered in Kipfenberg. Law enforcement agencies have conducted broader DNA collection efforts in the surrounding region, seeking potential links to the remains. These efforts reflect a modern approach to cold case investigation, where biological evidence collected decades earlier can sometimes be re-examined with new technology. However, in this case, no definitive breakthrough has been reported. The case remains open, and investigators continue to treat it as an unsolved homicide. From a procedural perspective, the Sonia Engelbrecht case illustrates several challenges inherent in long-term investigations. The first is the vulnerability of early-stage evidence. The initial hours after a disappearance are often critical, yet in this case, the seriousness of the situation was not immediately recognized. As a result, opportunities to preserve evidence or identify witnesses may have been lost. The second challenge is the passage of time itself. Even when investigations are thorough, time can erode the reliability of memory and the availability of physical evidence. The third challenge is geographic separation between disappearance and discovery. When a body is found far from the original location of disappearance, reconstructing the chain of events becomes significantly more complex. Yet beyond procedural analysis, the case also carries a human dimension that remains central. For Sonia's family, the years between 1995 and 2020 were defined by uncertainty. The lack of answers created a prolonged emotional limbo. When her remains were finally identified, it confirmed what many had feared, but it did not explain what had happened. In many ways, the confirmation of death closed one chapter only to open another, more difficult one. The search for accountability. Accountability remains the missing element in this case. Without it, the story of Sonia Engelbrecht is incomplete. There is no resolution in the legal sense, no conclusion in the investigative sense, and no closure in the narrative sense. The case exists in a suspended state, anchored by confirmed facts but surrounded by unanswered questions. Today, more than 30 years after her disappearance, Sonia Engelbrecht's name continues to appear in discussions of Germany's most notable cold cases. Her case is frequently cited not only because of its mystery, but because of what it represents. The limits of investigation when evidence is minimal, time has passed, and the critical moment was never observed. It is a reminder that even in modern societies with advanced investigative capabilities, some questions remain beyond reach. Yet the investigation is not entirely static. Cold cases are not closed files. They are periodically revisited. Advances in forensic science continue to offer new possibilities. DNA databases expand. Analytical techniques improve. Information that was once unusable may one day become meaningful. For this reason, the case remains open. It remains active in the sense that it has not been abandoned. It remains relevant in the sense that it continues to be reviewed. And it remains unresolved in the most important sense. The identity of the person responsible is still unknown. Ultimately, the story of Sonia Engelbrecht is defined by a single unresolved moment. A young woman standing beside a telephone booth in Munich, intending to make a simple phone call home. That call never happened. Everything that followed, 25 years of searching, the discovery of remains, the forensic confirmation of identity, flows outward from that missing moment. And even now, the question at the center of the case remains unchanged. What happened in those final minutes? And who was there when Sonia Engelbrecht disappeared from sight forever? There is a particular kind of silence that defines cases like Sonia Engelbrecht's. It is not the silence of absence alone, but the silence of a moment that resists explanation, no matter how many years pass or how many investigators return to examine it. In the end, all complex investigations tend to collapse into a single point of focus, a single unresolved instant where the narrative stops making sense. For Sonia Engelbrecht, that moment is 2:28 a.m. on April 11th, 1995, at Stiegelmeierplatz in Munich. Everything before it is known. Everything after it is uncertain. and everything that matters sits trapped between those two states. She was 19 years old. She had spent the evening with friends, moving through familiar places in a familiar city. There was nothing in the known record of that night that suggested danger had already taken hold. No confirmed conflict, no documented threat, no indication that she was being followed or targeted in a way that anyone could later verify. Instead, what stands out is the normality of it all. A bar, an apartment, conversations, a walk through the city at night. These are the kinds of details that belong to thousands of ordinary evenings in any major city in Europe during the 1990s. Yet somewhere within that normality, something irreversible occurred. By the time Sonia reached the public telephone booth, the structure of her night had already shifted into its final configuration. She intended to call her sister. She intended to go home. That intention matters, because it anchors her firmly in a plan that contradicts the idea of voluntary disappearance. There is no evidence that she was preparing to leave her life behind. There is no documented indication that she was breaking ties or seeking escape. On the contrary, everything suggests continuity, routine, and expectation of return. And yet she never returned. The investigative timeline is precise but incomplete. Mark Bertle boards a tram. Sonia remains near the phone booth. The time is approximately 2:28 a.m. From that point forward, the case enters darkness. No confirmed sightings, no verified communication, no traceable movement. The city continues to function around her absence, unaware that within a very small radius and a very short span of time, a life has effectively disappeared from public view. This is one of the most difficult aspects of the case for investigators and observers alike. The disappearance did not occur in isolation. It occurred in a populated urban environment. Yet the evidence behaves as though it did. That contradiction between place and outcome is what has sustained attention on the case for decades. When Sonia failed to return home, concern grew quickly within her family. This reaction was not based on speculation, but on familiarity. They knew her patterns. They knew her habits. They knew what it meant when she did not come back as expected. What followed was the beginning of a search that would extend far beyond anything they could have. Imagine that night. Police involvement introduced structure to that search. But structure did not immediately produce clarity. As is often the case in missing adult investigations, early assumptions shaped early actions. Sonia was 19 years old. There was no immediate evidence of foul play. As a result, the initial response did not reflect the urgency that would later be associated with the case. Whether different early decisions would have changed the outcome is impossible to know, but what is clear is that the window in which crucial evidence might have been preserved closed quickly. In the absence of physical evidence, investigators turned to people. Witnesses were interviewed. Timelines were reconstructed. Movements were mapped. More than 80 individuals were questioned in an effort to understand what had occurred during and after that final evening. Yet the structure of the investigation repeatedly encountered the same barrier. The absence of a definable event after 2:28 a.m. There was no confirmed crime scene. There was no confirmed abduction. There was no confirmed struggle. There was only disappearance. Over time, the case developed into something more than a standard investigation. It became a long-term search for a point of origin that could explain everything that followed. Mark Bertle, as the last confirmed person to see Sonia, naturally became a focus of investigative attention. His movements were reviewed, his statements examined, his timeline verified as far as possible. This is standard procedure in cases where the final known contact is identified. Yet despite scrutiny, no evidence emerged linking him to the disappearance. He was not charged. He remains part of the case only as a witness to its final known moment, not as a proven participant in what followed. As years passed, the case resisted resolution. Theories multiplied because facts did not. Investigators considered the possibility of an opportunistic offender, Someone who encountered Sonia in a vulnerable moment and acted quickly. They considered the possibility of someone she knew, someone outside the known circle of family and friends. They considered the possibility of voluntary departure from the location, though this conflicted with the known patterns of her life. Each theory attempted to bridge the same gap, the minutes between the last confirmed sighting and the absence that followed. But none of these theories could be confirmed. No physical evidence anchored any of them to reality. The passage of time did not resolve these uncertainties. Instead, it deepened them. Witness memories faded. Environmental changes altered potential sites. The possibility of recovering immediate forensic evidence diminished with each passing year. By the time the case reached its second decade, it had become a classic cold case, open, active in theory, but largely dependent on the hope that new technology or new testimony might one day break through its silence. That breakthrough came not through human testimony, but through science. In 2020, the discovery of a human bone in a forest near Kipfenberg reintroduced physical reality into a case that had long existed primarily as narrative and memory. DNA analysis confirmed what investigators had not been able to prove for 25 years. Sonia Engelbrecht was dead. The confirmation was definitive, but it was also limited. It answered the question of survival, but not the question of cause. The forest did not explain itself. It did not reveal how she arrived there. It did not identify who brought her there. It did not describe the final act of violence that likely occurred somewhere between Munich and that remote location. Further searches in 2022 expanded the physical record. Additional remains were recovered, and the concealment of the body became clearer. The placement of remains within a rocky crevice, combined with evidence of wrapping and the use of materials associated with construction work, suggested deliberate concealment. These details shifted the understanding of the case from disappearance to homicide with intent to hide the body. Yet even this shift did not produce what investigators needed most: identity. No suspect has been officially identified. No arrest has been made. No trial has occurred. The case remains, in legal terms, an unsolved homicide. What remains striking about the Sonia Engelbrecht case is how much of it is defined by absence. Absence of witnesses at the critical moment. Absence of physical evidence from the location where she was last seen. Absence of confirmed activity between the city and the forest where her remains were later found. And ultimately, absence of accountability. In many criminal cases, time eventually produces resolution. Someone speaks. Evidence surfaces. Technology reveals what was once hidden. In this case, time has done the opposite. It has clarified certain facts while obscuring the essential truth. Sonia Engelbrecht was last seen alive at 2:28 a.m. She intended to call her sister. She never made that call. She vanished from a public place in a major city without leaving a trace that could be immediately followed. Years later, her remains were found far from that location, confirming a death that had long been suspected but never proven. Between those points lies the unanswered core of the case. Someone knows what happened in those missing minutes. Someone understands how a routine night out became a permanent disappearance. And someone has not yet provided that answer. Until that changes, the case of Sonia Engelbrecht remains exactly what it has been for decades. A story defined not by what is known, but by what is still missing. And at the center of that missing space, unchanged since 1995, stands a single moment at a telephone booth in Munich where a call home was never made, and a life quietly stepped out of sight.